Hi everybody, welcome to reading this week. I thought I would start with a little lesson for you. For reading this week, we're going to be reading out of a book called The Book of Animal Poetry. And this is written by Jack Prelutsky, Robert Frost, Emily Dickinson. So there are lots of different poets who contributed to this book that we'll be reading about. Now, the thing about poetry, I'm guessing that if we were in our classroom and I said, what do you know about poetry? You would mention that they rhyme. And while it's true, some poems rhyme, not all poems do. I'd like you to look at your first slide called Spring and follow along while I read it to you. Spring, out of a cave, out of hole, bear, rabbit, little mole, hatch from egg and nest in trees. The birds are back, and so are the bees. The flowers bloom, the leaves are green. How do they know when it's spring? Build your web, the bugs are back. Little spider, dressed in black. Bears, rabbits, birds and bees, flowers, grass and trees. Just like me, their face is warm. That's how they know spring has come. Now, the author of that poem, we don't know who it was, but you'll notice there were some parts that rhymed, but not all of them. Also, if you look back to the way the poem is organized, does it look like the way we would write or the way you would expect to see it in a book? No. Poems are organized a little bit differently. And the things that look like paragraphs, like the groups of lines put together, is actually called a stanza. So in poetry, we don't call them paragraphs, we call them stanzas. And in between each stanza, there's usually a little bit of a space. The other thing that's different is in books, when we finish a sentence, we just keep right on going. We might be on the same line. But in poems, that doesn't always happen. And so if you look at this one, they kind of started each new sentence on a new line. So the next thing I wanted to do is talk to you about imagery. Now, we've kind of talked about that a little bit in the past and what it means when authors or poets try and tap into all of your senses and they try and help you imagine like you were there. And they do that by using words that you can actually visualize, that you could see if you closed your eyes, that you connect with your schema. They might use sound words. They might use comparisons. And those are all called poetic devices. So authors use lots of poetic devices because they don't like to come out and say exactly what they're thinking. They want you to think a little bit in poetry, which is kind of fun because sometimes it can mean different things to different people. So I have a poem here, and I'm going to try, I think it's going to be hard to show you, so I'll just give you a look, and then I'll go ahead and read it to you, okay? So the poem we're going to read from our animal poetry book is called Giraffe. And here it is. Let's see. There we go. If you'll notice, it's like one long group of poems words. It's very narrow. So this poem was written by someone called Valerie Worth, and here's how it goes. Giraffe. How lucky to live so high above, the body breathing at heaven's level. Looking sun in the eye, while down below, the neck's precarious stare, back, belly, and legs take care of themselves, hardly aware of the head's airy affairs. Now, notice that poet did not just say the giraffe's head is really up high and it's far away from his feet. So what kinds of words did this poet use to help you imagine that the giraffe's head is far away from his feet? I'm going to read it again, and this time I want you to think about what poetic devices or what kinds of words the author used to help you visualize that. Here we go. Giraffe. How lucky to live so high above, the body breathing at heaven's level, looking sun in the eye, while down below the neck's precarious stair, back, belly, and legs take care of themselves, hardly aware of the head's airy affairs. Did you come up with some words or phrases that this author used? To me, when they said back, belly, and legs take care of themselves, that kind of shows me like, oh, the head is not comparing that or helping that at all. The next poem I wanted to share with you is called The Egg. This one I think will be a little bit easier for me to show you. Here it is. The egg. Let's see. If you listen very carefully, you'll hear the chicken hatching. At first, there scarcely was a sound, but now a steady scratching. And now the egg begins to crack. The scratching begins to quicken, as anxiously we all await the exit of a chicken. And now a head emerges from the darkness of the egg. And now a bit of fluff appears, and now a tiny leg. And now the chicken's out at last. He's shaking himself loose. But wait a minute, that's no chicken. Goodness, it's a goose. That poem is kind of a funny one, isn't it? That's written by an author called Jack Perletsky, and he writes lots of silly poems, kind of like Shel Silverstein. Really fun and kind of interesting. So what things did Jack Perletsky describe that helped you to visualize a bird trying to hatch out of its egg? I noticed that they said it started quietly at first and then it started to quicken, that when the head came out of the dark shell and then they realized it was not a chicken. So kind of a fun way to start. What I'd like you to do today on one of the very last slides is called a Mad Lib. Now, boys and girls, Mrs. Fells used to do Mad Libs when she was a little girl. In fact, that was an unquestionable thing we would do on long road trips. And the best way to do it is you'll notice in the story there are some blank lines. And on those lines, underneath it, it will tell you what kind of a word should go in there. So I'd like you to ask a mom or dad, or actually have them ask you for those words. So if you look down, here, let me switch over. If you look down, the first thing is an animal. So mom or dad would say, okay, tell me the name of an animal. And it's best if you don't see the name of the Mad Lib. So you'll write down the name of an animal. Next, it asks for a color. So you would tell them the name of a color. And you just keep going until all of the lines are filled in. And then at the end, it kind of makes a silly story. You can do this with your friends, other people in your family. But I would just like you to submit the words that you used. And again, it's supposed to be silly. It's not supposed to totally make sense. It's just a fun way of doing this. So enjoy your Mad Lib. Enjoy your poetry today, and we will talk again later. Have a good day, third graders. Bye.